At the the dam site, did you talk about the fish hatchery that the Oregon Department of Fisheries put in?
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about now.
Okay,
Yeah.
so at that stop where there was a dam across the river, that dam was actually built by the railroad company initially, and there was a fish hatchery that the Oregon Fish Commission had put in because they noticed by the 1890s that there were no sockeye coming back up to the lake, and they wanted to help. So they started out by putting a weir across the Grand Ronde River down by Troy, but the sockeye had already gone upstream at that point. So the next couple of years they put weirs across the Wallowa River, right about where you guys were standing out on rocks looking down into the deep pools. They caught all the sockeye that were coming up, and they spawned them out.
Okay, that's it. Yeah.
And so by spawning them out, of course, we mean they actually took the eggs out of the females and the milk out of the males and mixed those up. And then they put them into big pipes and they went down into the hatchery, and so they had produced fertilized eggs, and they also produced fry, little tiny sockeye. And both of those they put back in the Wallowa River. Well, sockeye can't survive that. But at the time, fisheries did not understand that. And then, like the third or fourth year that hatchery building was huge. That wasn't just a little thing. It was a
There's a
huge
picture
building.
of it on that map.
And it was, so once the railroad got up to that area and they had blasted a lot of rock out, they dumped the rock in the river and essentially built a dam. And the fisheries folks said, oh, this is great. We don't have to bother putting these little weirs in, which are kind of like putting snow fences across the river. We can just use that dam. So they continued to catch all the fish until by 1910 there were no sockeye left coming up the river, and by 1913 they were officially declared extinct, although they were probably all gone by 1906.
Well, the story now is the top, 8 feet, 10 feet of Wallowa Lake Dam is condemned. So they can't fill it all the way. The Wallowa Lake Ditch Company owned that.
Associated Dish Company.
Pardon?
Associated
Ditch Company. They hired one of their own to work out a way to get the money to repair that dam. And since it was privately owned, they couldn't get any government money. And he came up with a plan to sell the water to irrigators down in Columbia River. They paid him, I think, $50,000 a year for 10 years to come up with that idea. Well, the sons and grandsons finally kicked the old boys out, and they formed a new irrigation district and became eligible for government funding. So they're talking to the tribe, to the Nez Perce tribe in Idaho.
and they didn't tell us.
And our governor has allotted, I think, $13 million of lottery money to the rebuilding of that dam.
14
million. And since there'll be government money in it, there has to be fish passage. So they're talking right now. Nez Perce Tribal Fisheries is talking to the ditch company, is talking to the state about how they're going to move sockeye.
It's the talk given by Becky Johnson, who's a fisheries biologist who's particularly working on that project, is that they probably won't have a fish ladder. They'll have transport the fish, simply because the level of water in the lake will go up and down too much, so we can't get past the irrigators' needs and put the fish needs first, evidently. But there will be fish passage, probably some kind of form of transportation that's been agreed upon, and 2024 in 2024 the refurbishment of the dam will be finished, and Becky's assured us all in the Oregon Lakes Association that sockeye will be reintroduced between 2026 and 2028. So I'm looking forward to that.
I asked if any of those kokanee would have enough genetic memory of the ocean. And the fish biologists, they're all pretty cagey about that. And old Cy Whitman said, I don't know, he said, but I'd start with those ones down by the dam that are trying to get out.
Yeah.
Well, that negotiation with the dam, though, has been ongoing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And for what, 5 years, we talked about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, well that one guy, Dave Hockett, did that negotiating for 10 years. And he's the one that came up with the idea of selling the water to Washington.
Anyway, the agreement they have now has actually quite a bit of water for in-stream fish reserved. So, you know, it's an improvement from where we used to be.
We're trying to reconstruct something that's 150 years ago. But are there questions we should be asking on your behalf when we're talking to people here? Are there things you want to know that we haven't touched on?
You know, you say that the early settlers changed the route of these little rivers, creeks, and that this landscape was different. It was more swampy, and people have asked me, what does a Wallowa mean? And I said, well, I said it from the language stance. I said, to me, that first part of it, that wal, because way we pronounce it is Wallawa. There's a little pause after on the L. Wallawa. Well, that first part of it is talking about something tide. And people try to say it means winding waters, but if you say this was different, then it really wouldn't have been windy waters.
Oh no, they would have been.
It would have been winding waters.
It would have been more windy.
Yeah, it would have been.
You
would
made
have
it
had
sound like
lots
it was
of
more
little.
marshy and swampy.
Well, yeah, but it would have woven. There would have been braids of river and then a swamp place and a beaver dams and you know.
Lots of beaver dams and so you'd have a channel that developed, and then a flood would come and the channel would go, the main channel would go over here instead of over here, so there'd still be a wet place here. So that would become kind of a little marsh or a place that would bring up cattails and tules. But it wouldn't be the kind of marsh where you walk across and everything is squishy and you sink into quicksand.
And last night where we stayed, there was a pretty thick book. It was a history of Wallowa County. And in that part where it talks about the native part, it talks about, I think it's right here, where there was a fish hatchery where they fished, and it talked about there was a tripod.
Yeah.
And that's what it was called. And I said, that makes sense with how I said it's something tied. Well,
Yeah.
like you say the old Joseph's name, Walamut King. That first part of his name, Walt, is talking about his hair tied on top.
Ah.
So you see that Walt is talking about the tide, that tripod.
Yeah.
And then you talk about old Joseph's name, his hair is tied on top. Walamut King. That's the way my elders pronounced them anyway, but to me it talks about something tied.
That's what Grace Bartlett, who was married to a nurse person from Lapway, and she wrote early history books here, and that's what she says, and she's got a little pamphlet, but she said it was the tripod that held, that was the yeah, I got, but and also then, so the words we have from Phil Kashkash's book is, now you'll have to say it, but the Wallowa River is Wahawa, right?
Wahawa.
Okay, and then the people of here were Walwama.
Walwama.
Okay, Walwama. Okay. What other words do we need there that we were been wrong about?
Probably Walwama. The mountains. Wallowa Mountains.
Yes.
Walmachs.
Walamax.
Wama.
Walamax. Okay. Okay, there's an interesting question, because were individual mountains named or just...
Probably, but that's all I know for the general.
We've had a lot of, at the Giuseppe Center, I get all these people through, including somebody from Senator Merkley's office, and she said, why do we have Mount Howard here, for heaven's sakes? So I looked it up, and it was only named Mount Howard in 1925. So I'm on a campaign, so if you, Leslie, you come up with a name for that mountain. The settlers here called it Signal Mountain. And they said that people would give, from the top of it, you could see for a long way so they could do signals. But I've asked a couple Nez Perce from Idaho whether I asked Alan Pinkham Sr., and he didn't know anything about a signal, anything in Nez Perce that related to that.
I've heard stories of it.
Have you?
How it could signal to, because I'm